Take two. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Zeke-ollege Football. I'm your host, as always, Zeke, and uh, let's talk about Week 12. Very, very eventful week. It started on Tuesday with midweek action, and we had some really, really quality games happening throughout the week. But more importantly than that, we also just got more football, and I am always going to be a proponent of the more football we get, the better. So I don't think that there is a better time to start off than starting off with talking about Conference USA. A little bit of a rocky road for the CUSA last week. Um, a lot of them were playing higher level competition. New Mexico State was playing against Texas A&M. Uh, but there was some interconference action as well. Um, the biggest storyline right off the bat, there was an in-conference upset. Now, it wasn't as catastrophic as the Liberty Kennesaw State upset from earlier this year, but it was pretty big because we had Western Kentucky, who at the time was 7-2, had only lost to Alabama and Boston College, undefeated in conference. They fall to Louisiana Tech 12-7. So a bit of a clunky win, but Louisiana Tech still alive in search of a bowl game. Uh, and meanwhile, for Western Kentucky, that really hurts because uh, you take a loss, uh, and it could theoretically knock them out of the conference championship game. Liberty, say what you will about how they've played this season. They barely escaped UMass in overtime this past week, but they're not out of it yet. There are four teams that are still alive for the CUSA title game: Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky, Sam Houston, and Liberty. And all of those four teams play each other in the final 2 weeks. Western Kentucky has a road game against Liberty and then a game against Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State has a home game against Sam Houston and a road game at Western Kentucky. Sam Houston has a road game against Jacksonville State and a home game against Liberty. And Liberty has a home game against Western Kentucky and a road game at Sam Houston. So all four of these teams who are eligible to make the title game at this point all play each other in the final 2 weeks. So if you want to look at a conference race that is really coming down to the final couple of weeks, look no further than the CUSA. Very dramatic final stretch there. But speaking of another dramatic final stretch for who will make the conference title game out of the group of five, the MAC is also chaotic. We had Bowling Green beating Western Michigan, so they advanced to 5-1. But there's a couple teams that are 5-1 out of the MAC right now. Miami, Ohio, 5-1. Ohio's 5-1. Bowling Green's 5-1. But there are other teams that are still alive for a MAC title game. Primarily Toledo, although they're 4-2. If they win their game, if they win out, they have a pretty good shot about making it. They just need, I believe they would need Bowling Green to beat Miami, Ohio in the final week. But, or I think they need Bowling Green to either drop a game or beat. It's complicated. I think ideally they would need Miami, Ohio to take a loss, um, so they could play against Bowling Green again. But either way, they're still alive. So, MAC title race is still very chaotic, very hectic there as well. No team has a firm control on who's making the title game in either one of those two conferences. For some of the conferences, there's a team, at least one team that you can point to being like, okay, they'll probably make it. Um, not out of the CUSA because it is just it's chaos. CUSA, MAC, both chaotic. Um, and then one last story I want to touch on this this upcoming week, week 13. There is a game uh, that the Sickos committee has had scheduled, circled for a while, and that is the battle for the wagon wheel. Kent State Akron, a team that is 2-8, going against a team that is 0-10. Boy, that will be fun. Yeah, that's pure Sickos material, and just know I will be watching that one. I will absolutely be watching that one. So, um, that's gonna be interesting. That's gonna be very, very interesting. Moving on, let's talk Sun Belt. Uh, Sun Belt had a couple things shake up, um, primarily at the top, which is very interesting. Louisiana, the team that was really establishing themselves, they were undefeated in the Sun Belt. They only had one loss on the season. They take their second loss in a close game, 24 to 22 against South Alabama. And, it's a South Alabama team who has really been up and down this season. They've looked phenomenal, and then they've looked terrible. You know, they start off 0-2, then they win two straight with their offense looking like it's hit a new rhythm. Then they lose two straight, win two straight, lose one, win one. They are the most consistently inconsistent team in college football. And their offense didn't have a great game. Uh, you know, Gio Lopez, 285 passing yards. Leading rusher had 38 rushing yards. Like it's not a great performance, but got the win, and that's really at the end of the day all that matters. Also, Georgia Southern, another team that had high expectations, was on top of the Sun Belt East. They take a loss to Troy, a team that's sort of a lower rung Sun Belt West team this year. They're 3-7 overall now. And yeah, Georgia Southern loses control of the Sun Belt East. Marshall now has that. And yeah, really tough loss for them. You know, and there really isn't anything else that you can really say other than that. That's a loss that you just can't have if you're trying to make a conference title game. You cannot lose a game like that against a team that you're supposed to beat if you plan on making the title game. And then one last thing I want to touch on here. Again, ULM, they were 5-1, and they've now lost four in a row to go to 5-5, flirting with bowl eligibility. But they have yet to actually clinch it, and I'm getting a little worried because their final two games of the season are not cakewalks. I mean, they end the season with a road game at Arkansas State, and then they play host to Louisiana, who is still leads the Sun Belt West. So not a cakewalk in the slightest, but man, certainly something that you're looking at, and you're a little worried if you're a Warhawks fan. They started off so well. What's going to happen? But let's move on to the American Conference. Uh, and for starters, great game on Thursday night out of the American. East Carolina, Tulsa. Uh, the last play was getting ECU stopping Tulsa on the 1 yard line in the final seconds. Just a fantastic finish, a great game. ECU was fighting for bowl eligibility. Tulsa was fighting to stay alive for a bowl game. And yeah, back and forth game, and really just a good game overall. Um, hard to say anything else other than just really really good stuff. And then the other storyline I want to shout out from the American Conference, Tulane has been playing some really good football. They have 2 losses on the season, but those 2 losses were to Kansas State and Oklahoma. The Kansas State losses aged fairly well, I would say. Kansas State still looked at as a pretty high quality team, but the Oklahoma loss, I guess, aging a little worse now. But other than that, they've cruised in conference play. Um, closest game was the North Texas one. That's still 8 points, and recorded a couple shutouts in the past 3 weeks. They've allowed 9 points. So they only have one game left. It's a game against Memphis. Another good team, this Memphis team. So Tulane and Army look like they're going to be fighting it out for the American title, and I think that'll be a very very good game. Now let's move forward again. Talk about the Mountain West. Colorado State continuing their winning ways. They're still undefeated in conference, 7 wins. Jay Norvell continuing his turnaround on this program. But man, you look at the final 2 games at Fresno State. I think that one's winnable. Uh, and then against Utah State as well. Uh, I could see Colorado State making the title game. If they take a loss, that's where things get a little bit more interesting there, because then UNLV's back in play. But Colorado State controls their own destiny. If they win out, then they will make the conference title game. Uh, Speaking of UNLV, they cruised to an easy victory against San Diego State, still playing extremely well under Hodge Malik Williams. And at this point, they're kind of just hoping. I mean, they can win out, and it doesn't matter just because they had to play a tougher schedule. They just played one more tough game against Boise State, where they barely lost. Again, a very, very good game. That one back on a Friday night a couple weeks ago. But the two, uh, or I guess 3 big matchups that I wanted to highlight. First things first, Air Force against Oregon State. Air Force looked lifeless. Oregon State needed this victory if they wanted to make a bowl game. And Air Force shuts them out. 28-0. Fifth straight loss for Oregon State. And it's just disappointing. If you're the Beavers. You really sort of needed a win there. Final 2 games of the season against Washington State in the Pac-2, sort of de facto championship game, and then at Boise to end the season. It's tough to see any wins there. Going 4-8. I know, you were a power conference team just a year ago, and they started a new quarterback. They started Gabari Johnson, but yeah, no, it just something's got to change there. Might be a culture thing. I'm not sure, but 4-8 for Oregon State playing against weaker competition just should not happen. And then want to also highlight Boise State, a team that again has a lot of high expectations. They're the de facto favorite to make the 12-team playoff out of the group of five level. They had a tough challenge against San Jose State. They found themselves down by 14 early. They battle back and eventually score four straight touchdowns to not only retake the lead, but double up San Jose State. So a good performance there, but a bit of a scare for Boise State. Hopefully that awakens them for their final couple games where they play against Wyoming and Oregon State. And then finally the upset, or what I would view as the upset of the week, the New Mexico Lobos knocking off number 18 Washington State. Um, just a really surprising game. I was keeping tabs on this one really throughout, and I was sort of telling myself, I was like, there's no way that New Mexico is playing them close, let alone beating them. First ranked win for New Mexico since 2003. That is, it's been a while since '03. It's my lifetime. Their starting quarterback for this game, Devin Dampier, is younger than the last time New Mexico beat a ranked team. So good job for Bronco Mendenhall. Lobos are still alive to make a bowl game, which again seems kind of crazy considering, you saw them lose to Montana State in week 0. They looked absolutely lifeless through the first 4 weeks. Just a great turnaround. Won 5 of their last 7, and they have a chance to make a bowl game here. They just need a win on the road at Hawaii to finish things out. So definitely going to watch that game, not only because it's the last game of the season, the regular season, but again, for all the bowl snobs, certainly one to look out for. Moving on to the ACC, we had a couple interesting results from there. For starters, SMU kept it close against BC for a while before they eventually took control. It was a 10-point victory that really should have been a 3-point victory. They scored a touchdown with 8 seconds left to really boost that score in the end. But for Boston College, you're 5-5. You have a sort of must-win game, I feel, against North Carolina before you play against Pitt. I think that realistically they can take the North Carolina game with the way they've been playing. Pitt game will be a little bit tougher. Again, Pitt, good team. And actually, speaking of Pitt, they played Clemson very, very close. Trap game at Acrisure. Um, Clemson escapes that one after a 50-yard run by Cade Klubnik. Their run game didn't really get going, but their pass game was pretty effective, especially Antonio Williams, who had a pretty good game there. 13 receptions, 149 yards, and two touchdowns receiving for him. And then finally, Stanford. We haven't really talked that much about Stanford all year. Another upset win with a field goal. Stanford scored the last 17 points, including recovering, I believe they recovered an onside kick. I mean, it was, or my apologies, they actually forced a turnover on downs before getting into field goal range and kicking a game winner. But a great job by this Stanford team to, keep on competing. You're 3-7. You're not making a bowl game, but just the ability to stay with it and the buy-in from this from the players, I think Trent Taylor has something going there. It's a good sign to have this much fight in your team this late in the season, especially when things haven't been going well. But let's move on. Let's talk about the Big 12. And I know I said that the upset of the week was New Mexico versus Washington State. That's technically not the highest ranked team who was upset by an unranked team. That honor would go to BYU, who lost to an at the time 3-6 Kansas team, who's now 4-6. And they can still make a bowl game if they win out. They face Colorado and then a road game at Baylor. But tough final stretch, and they've beaten two teams, two actually undefeated teams. Pardon me, Iowa State wasn't undefeated at the time. They had one loss, but two ranked uh, Big 12 teams, and now Kansas staying alive after a disastrous start to the season. But BYU, I mean, that you just to lose that one on your home field, uh, I guess their luck just ran out. They made one too many mistakes, and it sort of did them in. But they weren't the only ranked team that was upset. Kansas State uh, versus Arizona State, both a team 7-2. Kansas State was ranked 16th going into it. Arizona State somehow, despite being 7-2, was unranked. And Arizona State got the victory. And it wasn't like it was a close like last second win. They were up 24 to nothing at one point. Kansas State couldn't overcome it. And the Sun Devils, find themselves with an outside shot at the Big 12 title. They need uh, a BYU loss to try to get in there. And I'll tell you what, they play against BYU at 3:30 on Saturday. So certainly a game to watch if you're interested in the Big 12 standings. And finally, Colorado. I mean, they are pretty much all but locked in to the Big 12 title game. They have a game against Kansas. a very shifty Kansas team, so wouldn't overlook them. But then they finish off the game against an Oklahoma State team who has just stunk all season long, dropped seven in a row. And man, it's really unfortunate. Oklahoma State had a bye week this past week, which was good for me because every week that I go watching Alan Bowman football is another week where I get progressively sadder as a person. Let's talk about the Big Ten. And the number one team in the nation, Oregon, played in a bit of a clunker against Wisconsin. They still won that game, but a bit of a clunker nonetheless. They won it 16-13. They gave Wisconsin a shot to win it at the end. Wisconsin did not capitalize. But man, it just sort of goes to show there isn't any team in particular who hasn't shown any flaws. Every single team has shown something that looks exploitable. And that just makes me really excited for this 12 team playoff to debut because I'm really looking forward to some of these matchups and having those stakes out there. Uh, Continuing on with that, Nebraska, they just cannot make a bowl game for the life of them. It's funny at this point. Um, we joked for the past couple of years that Nebraska is a really unlucky team. They had their infamous 2021 season where they were the best 3-9 team. They would, you know, barely lose to any team, no matter how good or bad they were. But over the past two seasons, Matt Rule has boosted this program up to a point where they can compete for bowl eligibility, but they can't get it. Last year, they uh, reached 5 wins pretty quickly, all considering, and they just were not able to get that last win for bowl eligibility. They lost their last four in a row after starting off the season 5-3. They lost to Michigan State, they lost to Maryland, they lost to Wisconsin in overtime, and they lost to Iowa to end last season. Now, you look at 2024, they did even better. They started off 5-1. They lose to Indiana. They lose to Ohio State. They lose to UCLA. They lose to USC. Now you're 5-5, staring down the barrel of bowl eligibility again. You play against Wisconsin and you play at Iowa. Those are two teams that could beat you. Is Nebraska going to go 5-7 again? They could. They easily could. This was a team that was ranked at one point this season, and it's funny to me to see this sort of steep drop from them. And finally, let's touch on the SEC. Um, Three real matchups of significance in the SEC. Um, Starting off with Tennessee, Georgia. The SEC cannibalism continues as Georgia able to beat Tennessee. There is just too many teams in the SEC that could make the playoffs. You have 5 teams with two losses in the SEC. You just look at Georgia alone. Georgia beat Texas, the team who's first in the conference right now. They beat Tennessee. They lose to Alabama, who technically has a worse record than them in conference play because they have less wins. They lose to Ole Miss. I mean, I'm looking at a bunch of teams that really could be competing. Even if you go a rung below, South Carolina's been playing phenomenal. They beat Missouri 34 to 30 after a late touchdown. Lenora Sellers playing good football at this moment. They beat Texas A&M, an SEC team with only one conference loss, two losses overall. You know, then you counter even down further. You look at LSU, a team that just lost to Florida, who Florida has been having an up and down season. They're 5-5 right now, 3-4 in conference play. But LSU earlier on in the season beat Ole Miss. They beat South Carolina, but they lost to Alabama. LSU lost to Texas A&M. You even look at a team like Missouri. Not that Missouri is going to make a run at the championship or anything like that. That's a little silly to say, but they're another team that is like has some wins against good opponents and just has lost against three of the top teams in the conference. It is the most parity we've seen in this conference in a long time, and I'm all for it. It's very entertaining stuff to watch the SEC every week. But let's get into some things that I'm really excited to talk about, which is the ramifications of this week. One of the things I started doing for the final couple of weeks of the season, starting in, I believe I started this in week 10, is talking about who's eliminated from bowl games, who's making bowl games, and stuff outside like news about the sport. So this week we're going to talk about some coach firings because there were five coaches who were fired this week. That is a massive number of coaches who were let go. And for starters, we'll talk local to me. You see the Patriots hat. We're going to talk Don Brown at UMass. It was his second stint at UMass, just couldn't get it together, unfortunately. It's a tough place to recruit to. And I want to be able to tell people about good UMass football, but it's a struggle. UMass just in my lifetime has not been a good program and will continue to struggle because how do you get people to transfer over there? You know, yes, it's a good school. Yes, it has, good dining, but the football program has been so historically bad. The facilities there are not great. I mean, I don't know how you would build that program back up unless it is fully within like everything is changing. Mike New also fired over at Ball State. They, spoiler alert, aren't making a bowl game this year. And he started off with a championship under his belt at Ball State and just has not sort of done anything else after that. It's a little unfortunate there, but college football is absolutely a what have you done for me lately kind of sport. Dan Drayton over at Temple, another relatively new coach. let go Temple. Just beat FAU in overtime this week, but it didn't matter because Stan Drayton has not had a very good tenure there at all. Then we look at the team that they beat, FAU, Tom Herman. You know, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Tom Herman used to be the coach at Texas, and now he's getting fired from FAU. And then finally, Biff Poggi. Unconventional hire at the time. It just never really worked out for him at Charlotte. So five coaches gone, and the coaching carousel gonna continue to spin around and around and around. But let's talk about bowl game ramifications. Because there were some teams who were eliminated from bowl contention. And when I say eliminated from bowl contention, I mean teams that hit the 7 loss mark. Um, I know technically teams can still make bowl games with 7 losses if all the bowl slots aren't filled and if their academics are high enough. I believe it's the APR rate. I'm I'm forgetting. I'm blanking on the acronym. But these are teams that hit 7 losses on the season this year, so are theoretically eliminated from bowl contention. Ball State, Central Michigan, Tulsa, FIU, San Diego State, and Hawaii. All of those teams have been eliminated from making a bowl game. Out of those, I would say that the most surprising, to me at least, was probably Central Michigan. Because they didn't look terrible at the start of the season. Central Michigan was very sort of up and down at the start of the season. They actually had a win over uh, San Diego State. But when they got into conference play and the injuries started to rack up, they just couldn't keep up. They were down to their third and fourth quarterbacks on the roster. Because they start off with Joe Labus, the Iowa transfer. Then he got hurt. They went to Burt Emanuel Jr. He got hurt. And then they were rotating between Tyler Jefferson and Jaden Glasser. Neither one of them are all that good yet. I mean, they're both young quarterbacks. Jefferson is a freshman, and so is Glasser. But injuries absolutely hurting the Chips this year. And also, you look at some of the early season losses that could have prevented this thing. Central Michigan, they didn't have any like early season losses that really were close. I mean, you had the Ohio game, that was more of a comeback attempt. The Eastern Michigan game hurts at this point. But you're looking at a team like maybe San Diego State. They lost to Central Michigan in a comeback attempt. FIU, you know, they've had a couple losses that sting. They lost to UTEP. So just one or two losses really hurting at this point. Let's talk about teams that are making bowl games. Some good news. Boost the morale. Talking about East Carolina, North Carolina, Baylor, Washington, Rutgers, Miami, Ohio, Bowling Green, Buffalo, Northern Illinois, Arkansas State, and Texas State. All of those teams are bowl eligible right now. East Carolina, they fired their coach, still made a bowl game. Baylor, Dave Aranda started the season on the hot seat and coached his way to a bowl game. That's impressive stuff. You look at a team like Northern Illinois, they beat Notre Dame earlier this season, just now making a bowl game. Washington making a bowl game under new staff. And then finally, a new segment that I determined I didn't like the name, whatever I named it last week. I didn't like that name. Because just didn't roll off the tongue. Because I knew I called it something. Bowl bid games. That doesn't roll off the tongue, silly. We're calling it the bowl eligible. Two teams that are sitting at 5 wins, where the winner of that game gets to go to a bowl game. This week, there's only one such case, and that is Nebraska versus Wisconsin. So if you want to tune in to the bowl eligible, then you should find Nebraska versus Wisconsin on your TV dials. It's going to be 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. So that's going to be one to watch, just for storylines. Because if Nebraska doesn't win that one, I mean, Matt Rule dropping to 0-9 in potentially bowl clinching games, that's unfortunate. For Wisconsin, they don't have an easy game after that either. They get to play against Minnesota, a Minnesota team that already bowl eligible and trying to spoil their season and win Paul Bunyan's axe. So certainly something to watch out for. But that will all but do it. Again, can't talk about the updated CFP poll because it hasn't come out yet at the time I'm recording this. My show slot, it's great for some things, but can't talk about things that happen on Tuesday nights because we're trying to preview the next week of college football, and it's I don't want to disclude MAC teams from that preview, but I'll try to make a short form video, I guess, talk about my thoughts on the new CFP poll when it drops. But in the meantime, I've been Zeke. This has been my Week 12 reactions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.